I'm Gabby and I'm a wet and wet oil painter, and today we're going to do part 3 of our series of how to paint canvas tints in our pictures. So today is the big day. Today is the day we paint the teepee. So behind me I have a drawing of a teepee, and I will sort of go through describing it as we paint it so that this doesn't end up being too long. So let's get started. So there I have you guys sort of close up so you can see our teepee. Now, I don't want to spend a whole lot of time talking about how to draw a teepee. I would suggest that you go online and look up pictures, do some tracing, do some sketching, and just some practice of sort of how to draw them. Very quickly though, a teepee has a canvas that wraps the whole way around it, and then it is connected by these sort of dowels that run through here. This is where the door is, and then depending on the weather, depending on the time of the day, they will throw a flap that goes over and completely covers up the door. These are smoke flaps up here that can be opened and closed depending on the weather, depending on, whatever they need them, however they need them set. And then the poles, and the poles are on the inside of the canvas, and they're drawn out on, they're drawn out on here, and they're basically just to show us where we're going to be seeing them through the canvas. Now, this is going to be a teepee in the daytime. We're going to suppose it's daytime. A nighttime teepee looks completely different because it glows from the inside when they're burning their fires inside. So let's get to painting this. And what we're going to use some flat brushes. So I'll just grab some flat brushes as I go. So I'm going to start with this one. And this canvas is completely dry. So if you are painting wet and wet, you can either sort of leave that area unwetted, or you can wipe it out with a tissue before you really get started. So if you are watching this and you have not watched lesson 1, especially lesson 1, go back and watch that before, because I'm not going to go through describing too much of this stuff. The colors that we're going to use are going to be the same colors we were using before. I call it my ultra umber. So it's burnt umber mixed with ultramarine blue and a lot of paint thinner. So I'm going to get paint thinner on my brush, and then I'm going to grab a little of both of those paints and just bring them together. And the consistency ends up being almost like water, and that's a little bit too blue. Okay? And there's going to be a couple places where we sort of have lines, but for the most part we won't be doing these vertical sort of lines when we're doing the wash on the canvas. So that just sort of gives us our back line. We're going to suppose, I should have said this before, that the sunlight is coming from this direction. I believe, I might be wrong about this, and I should know this, but I believe that the smoke flaps always face towards the sun. I might be wrong, but I think that's how it goes, that they face out towards the sun. So this would be basically a sort of morning picture. Depending on the tribe, teepees can vary wildly depending on, the people that made them. For instance, the Plains tribes, they used buffalo hides for their teepees. Now they just use canvas, but they used buffalo hides. Where your woodland natives used, some of them would use like birch bark, and they did not use teepees nearly as much as they used things like wigwams. Again, if you haven't seen the first video, go back and watch it, but I am very familiar with these. I've done a lot of photography of teepees, and I've spent a lot of my life around them because I am a historical reenactor and I reenact the fur trade, and so a lot of people have teepees in that sort of realm. Alright, so now we have this wash on here. And we'll take a paper towel, and we'll be doing the wiping. I'm going to wipe that back line. If you sketch out your teepee or whatever before you paint it, you do want to try to keep your pencil lines as minimal as possible so that they're not showing through the paint. I wanted them to be a little bit darker than I probably would have had them if I was just painting, because I wanted you guys to be able to see them. So besides doing that back line, we want to do our wiping sort of the same direction, because we're going to make this look like a sort of rounded cone. That's what we're going for. We have that wiped out. Now the next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to do another wash with our dark wash color, but I'm going to add a little bit more blue to it. And then this wash, we'll do that back line again. But we're not going to go the whole way around. And then I'm going to brush this off. All right, now I'm gonna have separate brushes for my colors so that I can sort of move around with my colors without having to do a lot of brush cleaning. So I have another flat brush that I'm gonna use, and I'm gonna get some paint thinner on it. And I'm going to put some paint thinner on to the canvas itself to do this part. Now, if you've painted around it, you'll want to do this part a little bit carefully so you don't bleed too much into your other stuff. And just know that if you're painting wet and you have done your background, you probably will have to go back through and you know, fix up the edges around your whatever you're drawing out, no matter what it is. You will have to sort of fix up the stuff around it because paint likes to move around a little bit, which is okay. Wipe that down while I have this out. Okay, so now we have this wetted down, and I am going to take some Indian yellow, and I'm going to go in between here and just sort of swish back and forth so that I can sort of blend it. I'm going to grab a little bit of yellow ochre, and back where these meet, we'll bring in a little bit of yellow ochre. I'm going to take my brush, and I have a little bit of burnt sienna, and I am going to put some of this paint thinner on my palette. I do use Gamsol as a paint thinner. If you're looking for a good paint thinner, that's what I would suggest. And so I'm going to make this wash for this front part with the burnt sienna because it's a little bit more reddish, but I want it to be really, really, really light. And you can go right over the top of the door because we'll come back over and reshade that. So now we have that done, and we're going to wipe down this wash. Now, I don't claim this to be a perfectly drawn teepee. Again, sort of figure out how to draw them. That's kind of a totally different battle. Once you get them, though, they're very simple things. Now that I've sort of wiped that lighter area, I'm going to wipe this without bringing it sort of too far back over that way because I don't want to spread the color too much. I'm going to take a dry brush, and starting from here, I'm going to come over, and if you start to get anything on your brush, just wipe it off. And then I'll come back over this way, and basically we're just shading this so that it looks very cylindrical. Teepees aren't actually round. They have many, many sides that makes them look like they're round, but they're not quite round, just something to keep in mind. I did not have the bottom completely rounded out either. Wipe this so you guys can see this a little better. This line right here is straight. If I were to round this out the whole way, what ends up happening is it ends up looking like you're looking down in the sky at the teepee versus standing on the ground, because the ground will end up sort of covering a lot of that up. So that's actually fairly flat. Okay. All right. So now we have our sort of shading, and then we're going to do our overcoats of paint. So I'm going to start with just white, and I'm going to come down straight. And again, we can go right over the top of the doors, not a big deal, and then we'll wipe over. And these aren't straight lines, they're sort of starting up and then coming over. And then I lightly bring my brush off the canvas as I come around. All right, and don't be afraid to wipe off your brush a lot in this process. Now I'm going to take my white, and I'm adding a little bit of unbleached titanium white. You could add, you know, any kind of tan, maybe a teeny weeny bit of brown, but have a pile that's white and then one that's a little bit more off-white, because you will need a little bit of color to stand out here and there. Around, and then I'm going to take that unbleached, and I'll bring a little bit of white with the unbleached, and you know, bring both colors, and then And then we'll just blend this together. Okay. So now we sort of have this shaded cone thing. If you see these during the day, you don't usually sort of see the outlines of the poles through the canvas, but it does actually look a lot more realistic in a picture if you can. So we're going to take our dark brush, and we're going to take our Ultra Umber, or Umber Ultra, or whatever we're calling it, and along where we have these lines, we're going to make vertical lines of this darker stuff. Okay, now that we have those darker lines, we're going to blend them. Before we do that, let me explain it. This edge here, okay, so on this side over here, we don't want to blend that. We want that to look nice and crisp. We're going to be adding white to the other side of it. On the other side, though, we're going to blend it. And we're going to make those little swoopy kind of like, almost like a very shallow U sort of brush stroke. Okay, and then you'll go over to the next one. Now in that process, I ended up sort of losing my edge on that. So I'll just come back through and I'll put an edge on it again. And then we'll just keep on moving. Okay. I had a little bit of dark on my brush, so just add a little bit more of that. I want that back panel to look, you know, markedly darker than the rest. Okay, so now we have those in. And we're going to take our light brush, not our light brush, we're going to take our white brush. And I'm going to use a smaller flat brush to do this actually. So I'm going to take white, there's a tiny bit of the unbleached in it, but it's mostly white. Okay, and I'm going to run along those other lines that we had, just on the other side of them. And just try to do your best to keep them, you know, as straight as possible. They don't have to be perfect, but the straighter the better. While we do this highlighting of the other side of these poles, I'll tell you guys a little bit more about teepees. So teepees are really cool things. I'm sure that it took, you know, a long time to sort of come up with what worked the best, but teepees are really, really neat. They can withstand storms better than any of the other tents that people have at camp. In fact, if somebody said there was a tornado coming and there was nowhere to run or hide, I would be like, well, I'm going to the teepee, because they can withstand some incredible amounts of wind. I think I heard somewhere that they can withstand over 100-mile-an-hour winds. And I don't doubt it, because they're, you know, cylindrical the whole way around, so the wind doesn't really get caught up on them. If they do have a big storm, they close those flaps completely. They really are remarkable things. And they're fairly simple to draw. They're not fairly simple things, though. They're not too hard to put up. I watched them, you know, being put up many times. They put up 3 poles in sort of a tripod shape, and then they add on poles and add on the canvas and do that. So it's fairly straightforward to set them up, but they actually have like inner liners. They have ropes that go in certain places to keep the water from, you know, running down. It'll hit the poles, and they have it. There's ropes that go around them. There's ropes that go around the poles, and then there's like these little spacers so that the water goes down, and then it comes down the bottom of the poles on the outside, and it's pretty neat. Okay, so we're going to take our flat brush, and we want to leave, just like we left that hard dark line on the inside, we want to leave that hard white line on the inside as well. All right, let's keep on moving. this in. And if you feel like you need to have something stand out more, you can always come back in with more paint. All right, so now we sort of have the body of our teepee. I have black, and I'm going to use black and white, obviously, to make gray. And this area sort of in here, I'm going to paint gray. And I don't want it to be gray with blue in it. I want it to be just gray because I want it to look separate from the teepee itself. So this is sort of negative space in here. I think I'll lighten that up just a little bit. And then along that top, I'm going to come back in and I'm just going to put some white up there. And then I'll pull it down. Then we can really sort of see the top. And sort of opposite of that, how we lightened up the top, I'm going to come along and sort of darken up the bottom. So I'll just darken it and drag a little bit of that upwards because it's getting a little bit of shadow from the ground. Okay. Now that we have this sort of done, I wiped off this brush really well. Let me wipe it off again just for good measure. Okay. And just like how we sort of tie our skies together by running our brush over it, instead of doing it horizontally, we'll just do it vertically, sort of, but go along with, you know, the triangulation of it. And then you can do a couple of these where you come across a little bit. And it just sort of ties it together. Alrighty, let's move on. We're going to move on to our flaps. Okay, good. And now I'm going to grab some white, and I'm going to hit this with white. Now to mark them, to identify them. And the reason that we did that gray is so that we can actually see some bits of those poles coming down into it. So I'm going to grab those as they come in. And just paint them with black, because you can see them as they come in. That's sort of the illusion that happens with them. All right, and then I think I'm just going to darken that a little bit so that we can see that that's where that flap starts. All right, onto the door. So like I said, there's little pins that come down, and they sort of stitch together the teepee, which meets here. And then we'll paint the door. Now, like I said, there are door flaps that go over these. It just depends again on the time of day. It depends on the weather. To keep these simple, I am just going to leave it as though it's sort of open. You could paint it where you could see some people sort of sitting on the inside, or where you can see the fire on the inside. Again, I'm going to keep it simple, but you could get creative with that. The doors are sort of big oval shapes. And I don't want to leave that looking too brown, so I'm actually going to come back in with some black and sort of make it shaded. Okay, good enough. And I left it darker on this side and lighter over there. And guys, that is how you paint the canvas on a teepee. Just looking at this to make sure that we got everything we need. One thing that you get sometimes, I'm gonna grab a little bit of white, is where the canvas will sort of wrinkle, or sometimes they'll have like a pole, excuse me, a rope that goes over the pole at a certain place. So you can do little lines that come across like that. So that's it, guys. That is our teepee. If you guys have any questions or comments, put them in the comment section of the video and I will do my best to address them. If you guys could like, share, subscribe, that would be absolutely wonderful. I'm Gabby. Until next time, I really do hope that you guys fall in love with oil painting just as much as I have. Bye, guys.